Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining our presentations today. We're really excited to have everyone. I just want to check in real quickly on the poll results to say who's in the audience, because we have well over 100 folks joining us from all over today, and folks who are interested in StormStore as a project, who may even have a site that could participate in this project, or live in a community where StormStore and credit trading could be beneficial. But the vast majority of you just want to learn about StormStore, what it is, and how credit trading can work in Cook County, or maybe in your community if you're outside our region. We're going to try to cover all of that in the next hour and change, and then make time at the end of the presentation to go through your questions. So thank you for joining us today. Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty. We're excited to be presenting what may be an update for some of you, and for others a completely new opportunity. We hope you'll leave today with a sense of how to improve the quality of the places where we live, work, and play, how to plan, build, and maintain infrastructure for increasingly severe rain and urban flooding that is damaging our region as a result of the climate crisis, and so as you don't leave despondent, how to benefit your community through working with StormStore. During this webinar, if you have the option to submit questions at any time using the Q&A function located in your Zoom menu bar. Please note this is not the same as the chat function. Our team behind the curtain will be monitoring these questions, and we will allow time at the end of all 4 presentations to try to answer your prompts. So we've got a sharp team here right now, and I am excited to introduce them. But before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared via email for all those who registered a week or 2 following the event. And one last reminder before we get started, that the closed captioning is available for this webinar, and you can find that in the Zoom menu bar. So, hello and welcome. Today's webinar is hosted by the Metropolitan Planning Council together with our partners at the Nature Conservancy's Illinois chapter. Today's presentation will introduce all of you, hopefully, to StormStore, a partnership between our organizations, and provide an overview of stormwater credit trading in Cook County. What it is, why it matters, how it can benefit you and your community, and how you can get involved, most importantly. Next, we'll share some insights on what we think a beneficial StormStore project might look like. Our hope is that this will inspire you to identify projects in your community and really just reach out to our team after this webinar to get involved. Following that section, we'll hear from a colleague working in an existing stormwater market in Washington, D.C. He'll introduce you to opportunities that this type of market-based approach can provide to developers and communities working where they live. Finally, we'll hear from our local partners at the City of Calumet City and the Little Calumet River watershed. For those of you zooming in from outside the region, Calumet City is located just south of the city of Chicago within Cook County, between the Calumet and Little Calumet rivers. A personal aside, if you like paddling or fishing, Calumet City is a great place to get started. We're excited to be working with the city this year and to share with you why they're excited and eager to be an early participant in StormStore, our region's pilot stormwater market. And just a spoiler alert, their excitement is in part because the market is an opportunity to thread together economic development, stormwater management, and the creation of new community park and recreation spaces. So now that we have a sense of who's in the audience, I want to introduce my colleagues. And before we do that, I'll just say that we will be doing one more poll towards the end of the presentations, and I hope that you'll stay on to participate in that poll as well. First of all, I'm Ryan Wilson. I'm Manager of Water Resources at the Metropolitan Planning Council. Next up, we'll be joined by Jen Jenkins, the Natural Infrastructure Manager at the Nature Conservancy's Illinois chapter. We'll be followed by Khalil Kettering, who is the Urban Conservation Program Director at the Nature Conservancy's Maryland and DC chapter based in Washington, DC. And wrapping it all up will be Joe Wizawati, who is Economic Development Director at the City of Calumet City, who's also joined by Matt Berger, who's Senior Project Manager with engineering firm Mott MacDonald. So we're going to dive into our first presentation here. And remember, please use the Q&A function as we go through these presentations. And I think we'll be sorting common questions and raising them to the top once we get to the end of our presentation. So thank you for your patience. I'll be the first presenter. So I'm Ryan Wilson with the Metropolitan Planning Council. And for today's portion of the presentation, I'm going to lay the groundwork on which my colleagues will build up this idea of credit trading and StormStore in our region. I'll start by giving you a brief history of StormStore and stormwater credit trading in Cook County. I'll go on to share what our goals are for this effort, and I'll try to do my best to describe how it works, why it's important, so that you understand and can leave kind of armed to be an advocate or be a participant in this market. As a reminder, we are using the Q&A function for your questions, so please don't hesitate if you have a question to put it into the Q&A window, as many questions as you want. We'd be happy to sort them and answer them towards the end. I'm hoping that everybody will leave today's webinar feeling empowered, feeling knowledgeable about what StormStore is and why it's important for our region. If you're zooming in from another region, I hope you might be inspired by the research and the structuring we've done to support this type of market. We're always happy to engage with anybody outside our market to share our lessons learned and even collaborate. And also, we want folks who are, we want you to leave this presentation inclined to reach out to us, to ask for help, to discuss a specific project, or to get advice on getting your community, your municipality, or your business involved in this, this emerging market and real innovative tool for developing increased capacity in our region. So to me, StormStore is all about lowering the cost of doing the right thing. It's about maximizing the benefits to our communities, a multitude of benefits, economic, ecological, social. It's about increasing the resiliency of our communities to a changing climate. And it's about providing flexibility to the developers who are both private and public, who are driving much of the stormwater management capacity within our region. So I'm going to get started here. Please, please, please ask those questions. So what is StormStore? This is a neologism of stormwater and storage fit together, but it actually describes a couple different things. So first, StormStore is a partnership between the Nature Conservancy and the Metropolitan Planning Council. It's a real partnership, and we've been working together, and by real partnership, I mean we are truly collaborating to build this entity together. We've been working together over the last few years on policy changes that are intended to remove the barriers to credit trading in our region, as well as to research and demonstrate that there are economic benefits and community benefits to this alternative type of style of managing stormwater. And I'm happy to report that as a result of a lot of that hard work by many people who came on board and been supporting these organizations long before I got here, recent updates by the regional agency responsible for stormwater management, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, or MWRD if you're not from around here. We're moving into phase 2 of our partnership. And phase 2 is about implementation. So we've moved from policy change and advocacy to implementation. We haven't forgotten about policy change and advocacy because we're still working to make improvements, but we're shifting into this next phase. So the marketplace, it's about meeting compliance requirements. And specifically, it's about detention and volume control requirements for stormwater in our region. So later, we're actually going to hear from Khalil Kettering in DC, who's going to be telling a bit about DC's market, what it's like to be a developer there. I will note ahead, for those who are already formulating your questions, there are some distinct differences between the Cook County market that's emerging and the DC marketplace that is over 5 years in practice. And that is, we were primarily focused on stormwater volume control and not water quality in our region. So we started this work as a result of emerging research that was showing that there are disproportionate impacts from flooding across our region, Cook County and beyond. These impacts have a geographic bias towards hurting communities of color. We know that many communities have experienced economic decline as a result of changing regional, economic, not to mention national and global shifts. And this has resulted in hurting a lot of our smaller municipalities and lower income communities in our region. The research that we were looking at had suggested that some of these impacts could be traced to disinvestment or deprioritized investment in stormwater infrastructure. What we knew about stormwater management at the time is that it's managed in our region that it's often constructed where development is occurring. So it's driven by market-based developers. Often, for a developer to receive a watershed management permit and meet their permit compliance requirements, stormwater management must be built on site with new construction or any redevelopment. There are some very few restrictions when this ordinance first went into effect, and there were barriers to sending that management to an off-site location where it could be better utilized. This meant that much of the new stormwater infrastructure has followed development in urbanizing or hot markets and did not necessarily address places where disinvestment, systemic racism, redlining, and other biased planning and engineering processes had resulted in systems that could not handle our increasingly severe rains, especially where the kind of inclining trends of more frequent, more severe, more intense rainfall is creating disproportionate impacts. These are, of course, directly associated with our growing climate crisis. So back to StormStore, our goals is that StormStore is designed to shift this balance, allowing communities, developers, and municipalities to work together to optimize where stormwater management is built, solving the greatest problems, providing the greatest benefits. And our rationale is pretty simple. It's to lower cost, to increase community and other benefits that are directed where flooding is occurring, to increase the resilience and opportunities for economic development, and to provide flexibility for developers who are working in these markets, increasing the opportunity that infill development will happen and optimized stormwater management will occur. So what was the problem? Well, it's also pretty straightforward, but it was hidden for a long time. So the problem is we have intense rainfall and flooding. Updates to Illinois' technical rainfall data sheet, commonly referred to as Bulletin 70, was updated in 2019. Rainfall events are getting bigger. It's expensive. The full costs are hidden from sight, often borne through FEMA or private insurance, or not reported at all. So there was not a clear picture of how flooding was damaging our community. And a coalition of folks working in our region and across the nation have helped to bring that to light. Also, the problem is that it's kind of unknown. You may have seen recent national reporting by the New York Times that referenced a report that showed that floodplains do not align where the majority of flooding is occurring. So the flood risk is actually much greater than what floodplain maps show. And finally, that flooding and intense rain damage is unjust. Low-income communities are most vulnerable to damage and disruption, and many of these communities include our colleagues in Black and Brown communities who are experiencing the most severe damages. So urban flooding is an unjust burden. So you've heard about StormStore, you understand what the problems are. What is the solution? So we've described the solution as StormStore, but StormStore is built on the concept of stormwater credit trading. We believe it's one option. We believe that it's a complement to existing tools and methods of building and maintaining stormwater infrastructure. It is an alternative compliance pathway. It is not a replacement for developer-driven and permit-driven stormwater management. In fact, it is still permitted stormwater management. So credit trading is a set of policies that allows developers by right in our region to send some portion of stormwater management off-site, trade it between one site and another. It's market-based. It means which means that private developers are driving a lot of this. Public developers, cities, municipalities who are building public sites or those who are building in the right-of-way also must get permits and are also required to meet these compliance, but much of the development happens in the private side. This policy is also optimized. It allows for placement of infrastructure where it's needed most, and it's participatory, expanding the number of people who can participate. And so a policy such as credit trading must also be rooted in sensible research. So to get there, our partnership ran some analysis, conducted research to understand first that there's a need. So we did that initial research, and we saw that on the demand side, so on the right side of the screen, developers over a period of 10 years could have taken advantage of offsite management somewhere else in the region. And to show that there is offsite capacity available, we also conducted research that showed there are supply sites. So in this map, the darker colors, the bluer colors, if you're not colorblind like me, are places where opportunity can occur. So it's in the south and the northwest parts of Cook County. That's what that map shows. So there is a justification for this market, we believe. But to back up a little bit, before we conducted that research, there's a few steps that set this market up to occur. So first, in 2007, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District was given authority by the state to manage stormwater within Cook County, excluding really the city of Chicago, who has their own stormwater management ordinance. And the district does that through the watershed management ordinance, the WMO. In 2012, MPC with other colleagues in the region started to hypothesize, based on some of these problem statements we talked about earlier, stormwater credit trading as one alternative to drive more investment in the region. 2013, Washington, D.C. launched the first stormwater credit trading market in the nation. In 2014, that watershed management ordinance actually went into effect, where MWRD had been planning for a long time, and developers from that point on were actually required to meet these requirements. The StormStore partnership was launched shortly after that, was established shortly after that, and we started conducting market research to establish the needs of the market. In 2019, we had a huge year. Rainfall data was updated and integrated into the ordinances. We updated release rates, our pilot study. The pilot study was introduced through the district to study the impacts of credit trading over a 5-year period. In DC, in TNC, we'll talk about this a little bit later, Mount Olivet Cemetery was completed a massive green infrastructure project managing 3 to 5 million gallons a year. And then that brings us to the following year, 2020, our year, a big year in for many reasons. But the watershed management ordinance was updated to remove some remaining barriers to credit trading in our region. And as of today, there is one credit available for purchase, over 4 acres of volume control, which we can talk about, and a StormStore as an entity is live, and we're eager to talk to you about that. So the pilot is occurring in 2 regions in Cook County, in the southeast of Cook County, in the Little Calumet watershed, and in the western portion of the county in the lower Des Plaines River watershed. So who does StormStore help? Well, it helps all of these folks, private developers, certainly, municipalities, yes, but also affordable housing developers and landowners, consulting engineers who are looking for creative ways or more efficient ways to manage stormwater, residents and community members who are being impacted by urban flooding, or nonprofit landowners, maybe such as hospitals or schools who are having problematic flooding, who may want to provide a solution, bring benefits to their sites, while also being part of a community-wide solution. And we're looking for partners in all these categories to work with. So over the next 5 years, the MWRD has authorized a pilot program for these 2 watersheds as I described. So you can see an example in green in the bottom right is the Little Calumet River watershed, and then that lighter green on the left is is the Lower Des Plaines River watershed. So if you are a developer or a landowner in one of these watersheds, you by right can participate in these programs. How does the market work? Well, it is more complicated than we have time to explain, but simply there's two kind of parts of this. So there's the front end, the public-facing part of the market, which is about identifying projects, building projects, and matchmaking between developers who want to purchase credits or volume on a off-site location to meet their compliance permits requirements. It's about making those matches, and it's about the off-site volume control and management that can be sold into the market. It's also about the back end, verifying that these credits are legitimate, working with developers, working with communities, working with MWRD to make sure that the connections are made, the credits are sold efficiently, and that volume ultimately is managed where it is most needed, both at the demand site, because they have to meet a certain amount of volume on site, but also at the volume providing, credit providing site. So what are our next steps for StormStore? Well, it's a big year and big coming years. So first, we'll be identifying project sites, engaging stakeholders around these communities in these pilot watersheds, working to encourage investment, both from existing developers, from municipalities, but also through external grant programs and private and philanthropic impact investing. We're looking to demonstrate that these projects can be built, can provide benefit to the community. And then we're also going to be continuing to work to demonstrate the value of the market, assessing pricing structures, trading mechanisms, kind of the administrative parts of this program, while we're continuing to work on policy and advocacy to improve the outcomes of this project. And our role really is to facilitate the market portion of this. The MWRD will continue to manage the permit process, and we will interact in a complementary way. Think of a wetland mitigation bank as a corollary to how this might function. And so finally, just to wrap up, we want to work with you. I know we have a broad, looking at the folks on this call, we have a broad range of participants. If you're a municipality, if you're a landowner, if you're a developer or consultant or a community organization, or you're just interested because you don't fall into one of those buckets, give me a call, send me an email today. I'd be happy to talk with you, as will Jen, my colleague at TNC. And we want to make sure that you see the value in this and you can bring this value back to your community in whatever capacity you're participating in. So with that, I see we have some questions. We're going to save those to the end. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jen Jenkins at the Nature Conservancy, who will lead us through our next presentation. Jen?
Great, thanks Ryan. So again, I am Jen Jenkins. I'm with the Nature Conservancy as part of the urban conservation team here, leading efforts on StormStore, but also looking at ways to introduce more nature-based solutions across communities throughout the Chicagoland region. Next slide, please, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, we're currently seeking partners and projects within the Little Calumet and Lower Des Plaines watersheds who are interested in being some of the first guinea pigs for this pilot market. There are a few things to consider if you have a project site in mind in either of these pilot watersheds. The update to the WMO allows developers to use offsite projects to meet up to 50% of their volume control requirements. So this is the amount of water that must be kept on site and infiltrated into the ground. But the Cook County pilot is also allowing developers to meet a portion of their detention stormwater management requirements using offsite facilities. So really there is a lot of opportunity here to take advantage of this type of market and using it for different types of projects, which we kind of wanted to go through some examples here to highlight and get you guys to start thinking about opportunities in your own communities. Another thing I would like you guys to consider is that demand and supply, as you're thinking about trades, have to be within the same watershed. So although the Little Calumet and Des Plaines are both eligible watersheds as part of the pilot, you can't trade between them. So trades can happen anywhere within the individual pilot sheds, and but there can't be trades between the two eligible watersheds. And we're really encouraging project developers who are considering participating as part of the pilot to think about where the biggest impacts can be achieved as they look to match or pair with supply sites. Right now, this matching process is manual, so TNC and MPC are helping facilitate that process. But we're looking at developing some tools for you guys in the near future so that you can identify projects on your own. And as Ryan mentioned, MWRD has a tracking site of permits that have been approved as part of the pilot, and there's already a site listed there. So you should take a look at that and see if it fits with your site. Currently, the way we're able to track and certify trades is through the MWRD's stormwater permitting process. There are still a lot of details that we're working to figure out in terms of the market administration piece. And the first few projects in this market are really going to help us shape what the market will look like and what the formal agreements will be between buyers and sellers. And what we recommend for credit trading prices, and if there needs to be a recertification process, and how we can ensure that supply projects in the long term are performing as they're designed. So we're looking at a lot of lessons learned from other credit trading markets. And some of these my colleague Khalil will highlight later in his presentation based on his experience in DC, where they're implementing a successful stormwater trading market there. What we do know is that in order to complete trades in the pilot, both the supply and the demand project will need to be permitted, constructed, and inspected before the trade can be finalized. So we can do the matching before then, but the actual trade won't be able to happen until after both projects go through the WMO permitting process with MWRD. Ryan, can you switch to the next slide, please? So the types of projects we see as ideal are kind of illustrated on this slide. And I kind of wanted to pair them so you can kind of get a feel for how this will work. Demand for StormStore is really going to be driven by the economic feasibility and opportunity cost for the site. So this isn't just an on-site versus off-site cost, but there's likely going to be some consideration given to the value of development at the site. So on the left is an example of a demand project, and this is in a highly urbanized industrial site where a developer could be looking to redevelop or expand on the facility, and that would require additional stormwater controls. So in this case, the developer would have a couple options for their stormwater management. One, they could minimize the footprint or expansion of their building so that they could fit the new stormwater infrastructure above ground, but they would lose out on the cost opportunity there from the revenue from the new construction. The second option is they could maximize the facility and construct stormwater management underground, but this is typically pretty expensive, especially in a compact and developed site like this. So the third option is StormStore. And so instead of building a new stormwater control on site, they could actually purchase some of their stormwater management requirements from credits from the StormStore market, and then this would actually help them invest in greener, cheaper infrastructure offsite and maximize the value of their development. So StormStore is this economic tool, and we also wanted to show what kind of community and landowner benefits it could bring. The projects on the right are what we envision as like a typical type of supply that could be used to generate stormwater credits. So the middle pictures here show the before and after of a green infrastructure project that TNC worked on in Detroit. This is the Sacred Heart Church in the Eastern Market neighborhood. The church was constantly having to invest in maintenance of its parking lot because of damage from flooding. And so TNC worked with them to develop a bioretention and native planting green infrastructure project, and that provided over 150,000 gallons of stormwater storage. This project wasn't part of a credit trading market, but it's a great example of what type of value and opportunity there is in sites like this for StormStore. So if this type of project were to be built in Cook County in one of those pilot watersheds, Sacred Heart could have taken that 150,000 gallons and turned that into revenue so that they could help with the ongoing maintenance of their infrastructure, or they could use it towards other needs that they have on their site. And another example that we see as a possible candidate for supply is the playground retrofits. And I've seen a lot of communities sort of adopt this practice across the country. I know Milwaukee does this in Philadelphia, and in Chicago, this is a very popular program that is being put on through the Space to Grow program, and that is a partnership between the Healthy Schools campaign and Open Lands. And this program incorporates green infrastructure, learning gardens, play spaces, and a lot of these projects are actually funded partially through MWRD. And I know that they are looking on expanding this program and looking at the feasibility, possibly in Cook County. And we see a lot of benefits to this type of project because you don't just get the stormwater controls on site. You also get opportunities for environmental education and recreation, community space, and school. It becomes a school asset. Both of these are examples because they provide voluntary storage. So with the StormStore market, there are really only two ways your project can offer credits. If you're considering a redevelopment project, you could either build more storage into the project you're already considering beyond the capacity that's required through the ordinance, or you can voluntarily install a project on your site as like a retrofit. So that's something like these two projects would be an example of retrofits that don't necessarily have to meet any sort of requirements.
Hi, Jen, and this is a reminder to you and all speakers that a few of our attendees are having a hard time hearing. So if we can all speak up and project into the microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
Apologies, can you hear me now? Is that better, Ryan?
I can hear you. If you're in the audience and you're not able to hear us, please message us directly. Thank you.
So it's not, and I just want to make it clear, it's not just parking lots that are ideal to be supply projects. We also see similar types of supply in parks, street right-of-ways, vacant lots, and you'll even hear later on about how TNC is using cemeteries to generate credits as part of the DC stormwater credit trading market. So there's really a lot of opportunities for all type of landowners to think about how they could use stormwater as an asset and encourage more nature-based flooding solutions. Next slide, please. Ultimately, from TNC's perspective, we would love to see StormStore be used to build more green infrastructure in Cook County. So not only is nature-based solutions typically more cost-effective when compared to gray, there's a lot of co-benefits that come from having decentralized green infrastructure. You actually can capture more stormwater runoff over time when you have many smaller green stormwater management practice than when you would compare that to like a large underground system. So this slide shows some of the typical green infrastructure that are typically used for stormwater management, and you can start to see that there are additional benefits of using nature-based solutions. This type of infrastructure doesn't just manage and clean stormwater, it provides all kinds of other ecological services and economic benefits. Beyond reducing flood risk and improving water quality, green infrastructure has been shown to reduce urban heat, it improves air quality, it can improve the aesthetics of your property, and it can easily be tied to other uses on site. So it's really multifunctional and for landowners and communities, it brings all of these other community benefits. And StormStore is just a way to capture all those benefits and help us encourage the placement of new infrastructure where it brings the most benefit to the region. Next slide. One way that TNC is trying to identify where these high impact benefits would be felt is through our Greenprint. So this is a spatial analysis tool that TNC developed to look at where urban flooding is occurring across our region, but it also looked at socioeconomic factors, areas of disinvestment, and then some of the other environmental issues that are faced by communities like poor air quality, urban heat, and the lack of biodiversity due to limited green space. And this is how we start to identify communities that we see not only as most vulnerable, but also where like urban conservation efforts that use nature-based solutions could bring the greatest value from all the co-benefits from green infrastructure. These are the areas where we see StormStore could really start to help address some of the inequities of where investment and development is occurring, and where new stormwater infrastructure should be placed in Cook County to help deal with some of the flood issues that we are experiencing. Next slide. TNC is currently looking for partners and landowners within these Greenprint areas, particularly for the supply side to help develop new green infrastructure projects, sort of like the Sacred Heart project that I introduced earlier, and some of the work that Khalil is doing in DC. We want to replicate that sort of partnership here in Cook County. Trading is not limited to these communities listed here. But these are the areas that we see benefiting most from new infrastructure that could result from StormStore. One of the partners that we're working with as part of the Chicago Community Trust Our Great Rivers program has joined us on this panel, Calumet City. We're really excited to have some representatives from them to come and talk about their struggles with urban flooding and what kind of economic development opportunities they see from StormStore. And we're going to highlight some of the projects that we'll be working with them on. And this is like a really good example of how public projects could be planned and designed to solve both flood issues and generate revenue for your community. So, take some lessons learned from them and how they're approaching this. And if you have a project in your community that you think would be a good fit for some store supply projects, reach out to me. I would love to talk to you and see what kind of opportunities there are there. Next slide, please. So if we're going to solve flooding issues in some of the under-resourced areas that we highlighted in Greenprint and that we know exist in Cook County, there is a need in our region for both public and private investment in new voluntary natural infrastructure. And this really is at the heart of what StormStore is about. We need to see opportunity and value in spaces, and when by we, I mean all of us. And these are spaces that are typically afterthoughts, and like our parking lots and our vacant lots. We need to start thinking about the potential that StormStore could bring and helping turning these spaces into assets for communities. So I hope you leave here thinking about how you can start to think about stormwater as a resource and how we can start to use stormwater to invest in our communities. We're looking at innovative ways and spaces to get natural infrastructure distributed and financed across Cook County. So we would love for landowners and community members to reach out if you have a project or a site that you think could benefit from StormStore. Next slide, please. So a lot of the type of projects that we highlighted are just examples, and many are based on similar projects that TNC has helped develop or we're in the works of developing across the country. Much of what we're looking to do with StormStore in Cook County is based on market models from other cities. And these are some of the ones that TNC has been working on in other urban areas. The most advanced and mature one, obviously, is the Washington, D.C. But there are different types of stormwater models that are being explored. And we've invited Khalil Ketterling here from our TNC's Maryland chapter to talk about some of the work he's doing there to develop projects and give us some insights on what the benefits are of participating in a marketplace like this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, apologies, to Khalil to introduce some of the great work he's doing out there.
Thanks, Jen. Do I have control of the PowerPoint?
Oh, you will in just 1 minute.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, my name's Khalil Kettering. I work with the Nature Conservancy in Maryland, DC, and I am honored to be with you all today to talk about this really innovative endeavor that y'all are doing. And let's see if I can advance the slides. There we go. So in Washington, D.C., it's a local government initiative. I want to be clear about that, the city government. And they have a stormwater retention credit market, SRC is what we refer to it as. And so TNC, we weren't involved in creating the marketplace, but we saw that there was a huge value there. And so we wanted to get involved in helping to prove the concept the marketplace. So we created District Stormwater as an LLC to get involved in the marketplace. And the picture on the right here is an example of in the cemetery, one of the stormwater BMPs we put in that's being put to use. We wanted to get involved for three main reasons in DC. Number one, to prove that you can use impact capital to do conservation outcomes. So now that stormwater retention is a tradable financial commodity in essence, we can think beyond the pie of government grants, of foundation or philanthropic dollars, and now say, aha, we can get impact investors to invest in doing stormwater retention projects because we can sell stormwater retention credits to generate a return on investment. We also wanted to get involved in tangibly doing projects to have benefits for the local waterways in DC, the Anacostia, the Potomac rivers, Rock Creek, which ultimately helps Chesapeake Bay, which is a large driving part of our work here. And also to prove that this market idea can work. You know, DC is on the vanguard of this type of stuff. It's one of the first places in the world to do this type of work. And many great municipalities like yourselves are thinking about this. And so we wanted to help prove that it can work. And it's in its nascent stages. It's really early stages. And then as we prove it works, we can exit the market, but you'll have more and more private actors getting involved. So District Stormwater LLC, I mentioned, this is just a screenshot of our website. We are a supplier that builds stormwater retention credits. I'm going to get into a little bit of the model of how it works. So you have a developer who's building an apartment or a condo, high-rise, let's say, if anyone's familiar with DC, near National Stadium, World Series champs, I'm going to throw that out there, but near National Stadium, and that surface on your roof is really premium area. You can put amenities up there, you can make money off of that. And then also there might be some design challenges with fitting all of your stormwater retention on site. When DC created the stormwater retention credit trading market rules, they also quadrupled the amount of stormwater retention that developers had to meet on site for new developments. You have the regulator, the Department of Energy and Environment, which manages the permits to make sure that the developer has their required stormwater retention is met. They also manage the permits for any offsite stormwater retention. So that's where we come in, District Stormwater, and we have external financing. In our first pilot project, our investor was Prudential Insurance Company, actually. And we go out and find an existing site. I think like Jen mentioned, churches, cemeteries, universities, schools, places that have big parking lots, lots of impervious surface, places that were built several decades ago, so they don't have any requirement for impervious surface. We would provide the financing to design. We hire an engineering team to design the stormwater retention best management practices. We pay for the permitting to DOEE. We pay for a general contractor to construct the bioretention or whatever other BMPs we do. And we also pay for maintenance as well. And with all that, the landowner doesn't have to do anything. We then have a certification of stormwater retention credits that we can sell to the developer. They provide the funding to buy those credits. They can then show the city that they have met their stormwater retention offsite through the purchase of these credits, which is required to get their certificate of occupancy. That's the linchpin there. They can't actually sell space or lease space in their building until they get that C of O. And so that sale of credits over a number of years generates a return on investment back to the investor. How this plays out, this is an example of DOEE's stormwater retention credit registry, which is essentially a database that shows who the sellers are, how many credits they have for sale, what their asking price is. High impact, that column there essentially means it's credits, it's stormwater retention that's done in the places of the city where it has the highest impact ecologically and is needed the most. So it's almost kind of like, I think the best example I can give, almost like an eBay, right? Where a developer can go on and say, I need X amount of credits. Aha, I see District Stormwater has this amount. They're offering this price. Let me contact them. We have a sale. They then show the contract, the sale of contract to DOEE in order to get their credits. And then once that's done, DOE removes the amount of credits that we have available on the registry. So the value proposition for developers, for the builders that might want credits, I mentioned that the capital costs are cheaper. So it's cheaper for us to build stormwater retention in the ground, to build bioretention rain gardens, than it is for the builder to build 100% green roof, to build cisterns. And the big difference here is DC used to allow detention as a requirement, and now it's retention. So before, you used to be able to capture the stormwater, detain it, and slowly release it. Now you have to retain it, and if you capture it, you have to figure out how you're going to reuse it on site from your cisterns. So that creates a whole new challenge of, do we have enough of a need for that volume of water, a new separate gray water system and pipes in there and all of that. It's cheaper to buy credits off-site. Now they have to do a portion of their stormwater on-site before they can buy credits, but it still provides some cost savings. Now there's also the opportunity cost. I mentioned a little bit about that roof space as an amenity, or that underground space. You know, in DC, the value of an underground parking space in this dense areas is so valuable. So having more of those to be able to charge versus taking them up for cisterns, or having that rooftop pool, rooftop bar on top of your hotel, half of it a green roof, half of it an amenity. Some of them are doing dog parks up there versus all of it as a green roof, provides more revenue that the developer can get when they buy offsite credits. Another requirement is, if a developer buys credits, it's an annual obligation. So if you know that you need 1,000 credits, you have to buy 1,000 credits every year for the life of that building. But you can front load it. So if you saw that we had 46,000 credits, you need 1,000 credits, you can buy all of those up front at one price, and you're now covered for 46 years. So you have the flexibility of banking credits, of structuring your deal in different ways, so that you can have some confidence in the longevity of your obligation and how you're meeting that as well. And then there's a reduction of compliant risk. So when I, as a credit supplier, am selling you a credit, I'm selling something that has been inspected and certified by the city. And so I am guaranteeing that what I am selling is being maintained and is being kept up to standard. If the city comes to inspect the bioretention that we did in the cemetery, and they say, oh, well, all the plants have died, or it's been bulldozed, or something's happened, I'm the one that's on the hook to make sure that it gets fixed and maintained, not the developer. They've bought a certified product from me. So the developer, by buying those credits, has a reduction of their own compliance risk. It's upon me to make sure that they're maintained. Now for the landowner, the cemetery, what's the benefit for them? Why would they want to get involved? Well, DC has a very high stormwater fee, where they look at, it's a separate system, they look at all of your impervious surface on your property and then calculate it with a multiplier to assign a stormwater fee, and it's very high. And so some cemeteries and universities are paying $100,000, $200,000 a year in stormwater fees. And when your business model is you bury people on a one-time fee that they pay once and they're there forever, it's not really sustainable to be able to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on a stormwater fee that you weren't aware of, that didn't exist a decade, 2 decades ago. So the picture here is an example of a piece of roadway of another BMP we put in the cemetery, where we removed impervious surface, made it a one-way road, cut it in half, and put in bioretention to capture the runoff from the other parts of the road further upstream. And so by removing part of the impervious surface, it reduces their stormwater fee, it gives them a reduction, and they also get a discount deduction as well, so it saves them money up front. There's also revenue from the sales. So we, in our arrangement, have a royalty payment where some of the credits we sell over time, we have an increasing, graduated increasing royalty payment, percentage of credit sales back to the landowner. And then after a certain number of years, we exit the deal. The stormwater BMPs are still there, and the landowner can then certify and sell the credits on their own. There's also the reduction of flooding from doing the stormwater management on the property and how it impacts the property itself. In some places, churches get flooding in their basements, and by doing some of the stormwater management in their parking lot, it helps to reduce that. It helps to prevent urban heat island challenges by some of the trees that we plant as part of our bioretention BMPs. And the big thing is all of this happens at no cost to the landowner. We're paying for all of this up front with impact capital. All they have to say is, yes, I allow this to happen on my property. So some of our key learnings so far has been that doing this, large campus properties are the most cost effective and have the greatest impact. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, like this church parking lot here, that's about 2 acres. We're going to have a much better return on investment, a better impact doing something there than doing something at an individual home that has a driveway. Relationships are key. There's existing environmental community nonprofits that have been in place in DC for decades that have done great work, but that also aren't necessarily getting involved in the stormwater market. And so what we did early on is we reached out to them to develop relationships, and they were, through their existing partnerships, able to bring many of these churches and cemeteries and universities to the table to say, hey, let's talk, let's work together. We want to introduce you to this supplier, which was a much more efficient way than us coming to meet with these people who never knew us before. Relationships, again, landowners, right? It can sometimes take 18 to 24 months to get a landowner to say, yes, I'm allowing you to do the stormwater retention on my property. And it only takes 3 months to actually build the BMP, but we're starting at a baseline of what is stormwater and why is it important and how does it benefit me? So you have to be patient, and there's a lot of transaction costs up front of building that relationship, but it pays off in the long run. And then using relationships to get connections to developers that want to buy the credits. A lot of times developers aren't aware of the stormwater market, aren't aware of the nuances and the benefits. And so we've leveraged connections, personal connections we have, to get developers to understand, to buy credits. So the biggest thing we've learned is leveraging relationships is what's key to moving this forward. And then working with the permitting agencies from start to finish throughout design. Not just going in at the end and saying, here's our plans, what do you think? And they say, you got to change all this, this, and this. But from the beginning, having them involved, having the permitters involved, helps to expedite the process once we submit for final permitting to start construction. And then being aware of overlapping policies. So a couple of things we found out was in certain churches where we wanted to remove impervious surface, because Department of Energy and Environment wanted us to do that for stormwater. Department of Zoning also has a requirement that those churches have to have a minimum amount of parking and they can't lose impervious surface. So there's some disconnect and conflict there among different policies that this is an iterative policy and we're still trying to figure out. Or nonprofit landowners like churches, like universities, like cemeteries. Office of Tax and Revenue in the city said, oh, we're now generating revenue from these properties that makes them taxable. And so those nonprofit landowners said, we don't want to get involved in hosting stormwater projects if now all of a sudden our property is taxable. So we had to work with the city to give exemptions for saying, if you're doing a stormwater retention project, that's a public good, it's helping the waterways. So you still will be tax exempt if you're a nonprofit and doing that. And then of course, trying to find ways where you don't run into utility obstacles, which on private property, you don't have as much of that as in the public right of way. But it goes without saying, that's always a challenge. So trying to figure out what's in the ground, what's underneath first before we start putting excavators in there. And so what the city is doing from some of the learnings about this to help expedite the stormwater market is DOEE has created some grants that they're giving to aggregators, supply side sellers like ourselves to help absorb some of those upfront transaction costs because they know that's so costly. The relationship building with the landowners, finding out what the soil is like and what's in the soil and some of those things to help move this forward. The city also has set aside some funding for the early years where they will buy some of the credits themselves as part of meeting their MS4 permit requirements. And so the purchase amount is less than market value, but it gives some confidence to investors that there will be purchase of credits at some level, so they then will still want to get into the marketplace. Initially, the city said developers had to at least do 50% of their retention on site before they can buy credits. But the enabling conditions in DC, there's actually some new gray infrastructure and tunnels that are going in underground in parts of the city. And so the DOEE recognized if we're doing a green roof on top of where there's the new tunnels going in to capture stormwater, it's redundant. So why don't we still require those buildings going in where the tunnels are to meet their stormwater requirement, but they can meet it all off site. So this now directs investment into the areas of the city where high impact SRCs are needed most. And this is a new development that's just happening. And then the city's talking about saying if you're buying SRCs, making sure that it's high impact SRCs first, the places that need it the most. And the city is contracting market research firms to work with developers to say what's the best way to message this to get them on board, so that they'll want to get involved in the marketplace. Because some developers have been a bit wary of the concept of it's an in perpetuity annual requirement. You constantly have to buy credits, even though it's still cheaper. There's just a little bit of wariness about that. And the city's now also recognizing that it's a big lift on themselves, because they require maintenance reporting every 3 years. We have to get inspected to show that we are maintaining our stormwater BMPs if we're going to keep selling them. And the city has now allowed a process where we can take pictures, we can send in our contract with a landscape maintenance firm, and that will be good enough to show if the pictures are timestamped that we are maintaining this over a period of time, that our stormwater retention credit BMPs are still existing and functioning. And so that streamlines the process a little bit more. That's it for me.
Great, well, thanks, Khalil. And we're going to turn it over to Joe and Matt. Joe and Matt.
Okay, and you're driving this, right, Ryan?
I'm driving.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so good morning, and thank you for allowing Calumet City the opportunity to be part of this presentation. I'm Joe Wizawati with the Community and Economic Development Department for Calumet City. I'm joined by Matt Berger with Mott McDonald, our special project engineer, who will also be presenting today. Next slide. An established urban community with strong and long-serving leadership, Calumet City is the largest city on the south side of Chicago and is one of the oldest as well. Calumet City has great logistics for economic development opportunities, offering access to the nation's interstates, airports, and railways. And we're aware of the challenges we face and the impact of flooding. Next slide. Many may remember the movie The Blues Brothers. Calumet City was actually featured as the mythical orphanage. But some of you may not know that Calumet City had the original Cinch Strip before Las Vegas thankfully took that away from us. West Hammond, as Calumet City was originally known, was established as a residential and industrial community on the city's south side, where many immigrants settled. The nation and region were hit hard in the 1970s and 80s due to the economic decline in automaking, steel, and manufacturing industries. Calumet City is bordered by two riverways, the Little Calumet and the Grand Calumet rivers, where about 20% of the community is impacted by flooding. The city's stormwater concerns are not just the lack of detention, but also rivers, floodway, and floodplain. And we take a proactive approach to the impact of flooding on economic development today. Next slide. So how do we continue to expand and improve? We are a welcoming community as designated by the City Council. We celebrate our diversity and inclusive community participation. In 2019, we became one of the very few cities in the state of Illinois designated Better City for Pets. As a bordering community, Calumet City has been a leader and champion moving projects forward in the south suburbs of Chicago for many years. We are proud of our team building and continuity. We continue to expand our skills through our partnerships with local universities, our accredited college internship program, and local trades, sending Calumet City intern alumni better prepared for tomorrow. We've worked with our local businesses to encourage buy-in to a shared vision for our future assessing our local business needs through surveys for data collection and engagement. And we focused on planning and regional participation when it applies to growth. Next slide. Implementing our approach, we have made great strides toward partnering with local agencies as they apply to development. We work to identify the needs of the community and business through outreach. For instance, we've worked collaboratively with business community to rebrand and redevelop the Dalton Road State Street Industrial Region, or what we refer to as DSIR, a nearly 3-mile corridor comprised of residential, commercial, and industrial areas on the city's north side. We've identified some of the infrastructure and design elements that are needed to make this area a regional success. Part of the area in the DSIR corridor was the location of the Illinois University at Urbana-Champaign study, which received an award in 2019. This study looked at the severe flooding issues that plague the area that Matt will briefly touch on a little later. We do truly appreciate all the partnerships that we bring to the table on the many projects that we've worked. Now I'm going to turn the rest of this over to Matt Berger, who will speak on the more technical side of the project that Calumet City's been working.
Thanks, Joe. Now, over the past year, we've helped Calumet City form many strategic partnerships and successfully secure over $10 million in grant funding in an area that has traditionally been underserved and impacted by stormwater. But among all the projects the city has undertaken, we've identified that many are stormwater related, and this is just a small sample of some of them that we have where the StormStore could provide benefits for opportunities that previously did not exist. So this first project here is that we like to highlight over the next 2 slides is designing a resilient terrain, a University of Illinois and Illinois State Geological Survey study. Now, during the last ice age, Lake Michigan was actually called Lake Chicago and extended all the way down to Calumet City. U of I and the State Geological Survey identified the city as a potential location for a study to determine how the soil composition could be used to maximize green infrastructure benefits. So the results were a study that discovered that if the disturbed top layer were removed to get down to native soils and green infrastructure stormwater loadings were controlled, the area was actually ideal for green infrastructure to mitigate stormwater effects. The students and staff that performed the study, they won an award and through the American Society of Landscape Architecture for their work. And if you're interested, we're sharing the link right here, and I'd strongly suggest visiting it. And it's an interesting read, and they did a fabulous job on it. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level summary of some of the work that was performed on that study. The city identified urban flooding in residential neighborhoods in the northwest corner of the city where detention was previously not provided. And University of Illinois and the State Geological Survey examined topographic conditions. They did soil borings and existing drainage facilities. And the stormwater surfaces were modeled to study stormwater loading and specific GI uses. The study found that the benefits could be fairly significant, and there's a continued collaboration between Calumet City, U of I, and the State Geological Survey to further the work. So this sub-watershed could be a potential for StormStore participation where maybe right-of-way and vacant land could be used for green infrastructure to provide benefits not just to the 500-acre sub-watershed, but also for the Little Calumet River watershed as a whole. Next slide. So the next project we like to highlight is on the opposite side of Calumet City, and there's many areas in the southern portion of Calumet City that are in the floodplain. It was identified that perhaps the levee systems adjacent to the Little Calumet River were in need of upgrades, and we formed a partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to get the levees in the Army Corps levee program. A study identified areas where upgrades were needed, and the city is now in a partnership with the Village of Lansing and the Army Corps to improve the levees on both sides of the Little Calumet River. This is an area that detention is, again, minimal, and perhaps compensatory storage in parks or vacant land can help alleviate some of the stormwater concerns for the area. Next slide, please. This project is the Calumet City Riverwalk Canoe Park. It's a 15-acre park that is utilizing the natural amenity of immediately adjacent the Little Calumet River. And it actually is just to the south of a thriving commercial area. So this project is moving now into final design and utilizing the U of I study and some of the lessons were learned from the Illinois Geological Survey study as well. The park's stormwater mitigation is anticipated to be handled with green infrastructure. Now, with the close proximity to the commercial district immediately in the same drainage area, the park could offer maybe an opportunity to help with some of the economic development of commercial outlots that are literally in the same sub-watershed. And the park now can provide maybe not only just a amenity to the community, but maybe it helps aid in the economic growth of the community. Next slide, please. Calumet City, through the hard work of the SSMMA and other partners, is actually going to be the project lead for the construction of the CalSag bike trail. This is the east leg segment, and the bike trail passed through several pockets of wetlands. And the trail's eventual construction would not be possible without the use of the wetland credit program, which is similar in nature to the StormStore trading. And through the wetland credit program, this project is now able to move forward. So this could just, the StormStore could provide another opportunity similar to the wetland credit in order to get projects moving forward. So, but by identifying the community's needs and then the forming of strategic partnerships and utilizing some of the outside funding that the city's been able to improve stormwater infrastructure with, the StormStore, we view it as just yet another tool in the toolbox that the city is able to use to further its goals of improving the community. Next slide. And actually, Ryan, I pass it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Joe, and thank you to all of our presenters. This concludes our formal presentation, and we're going to move into the audience Q&A here in just a moment. But before we do that, we have one more question for all of you in the audience, which we hope you'll consider answering. We're just going to take a brief moment to pause and start to sort some of our questions. So you should see a poll popping up on your screen, and hopefully I'll see your responses starting to filter in. I am going to, yes, thank you all. Rapid responses. Okay, we're just going to take about 10 more seconds here and then wrap up this portion and move into the Q&A. Okay, thank you all. And so we very much appreciate your response. A number of you are really interested in reaching out or being reached out to by our team. We will be following up after this presentation if you provided your contact information. So I'm going to stop sharing our screen and then we're going to move into the Q&A section. So presenters, if you can turn on your video, I think I got you all here. Thank you. And then we're going to start with a few introductory questions. And we're trying to cluster these. We have probably about 15 questions here. I think the first one, Jen, I want to direct towards you. And this seems to really be about eligibility. So the question is around the forest preserves. Would they qualify as a project? And I would extend this to forest preserves in any public agencies or municipalities. Are they qualified?
Yeah, they are qualified. And we've been exploring this with the forest preserves right now, looking at ways they could retrofit some of their parking lots to include more green infrastructure as they're doing maintenance on them. So that they are definitely eligible. And park departments, we're also working with a couple park departments across the 2 pilot watersheds to identify ways we can build bioretention and other BMPs as part of their infrastructure. So yes.
And a follow-up to this, Matt mentioned that they're using wetland credits, mitigation credits. Would wetland mitigation, restoration credits or projects qualify?
They would, as long as they go through the MWRD WMO permitting process. I'd have to check on the USACE jurisdiction wetlands to see how that would play into this. But the isolated wetlands, yes, if you're going through the WMO process, those would definitely be eligible.
And for those of you wondering, USACE is the Army Corps of Engineers.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Jen. The next cluster of questions are really, I think, about the requirements for projects that are participating. And I'll kick us off with a question from Alan here. And Jen, I think I'll go back to you here. Is there a minimum amount of stormwater storage that's required so that there are no adverse impacts?
There's no minimum. The WMO lays out a very strict framework on the way you calculate the amount of storage that you can purchase for the offsite credits. So there is still requirements to build a 10-year, 24-hour storm detention on your site if that's required under the WMO. And then there's still a requirement of 50% retention on your site. And those are both the sort of the minimum requirements for participating as a developer.
Thank you, Jen.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Well, and if anybody wants to ask follow-up questions that you feel we didn't fully address, please please do so. Khalil, I'm going to turn this over to you to just maybe describe how this functions in DC, and then either Jen or I will jump in to follow. But in the DC model, who's typically responsible for the maintenance? The buyer of the credit, the seller of the credit? I think you started to answer this you did answer this in your presentation, but.
Yeah, so in order to get certification of your credits as the seller, you have to submit to Department of Energy and Environment your contract with a maintenance firm. So we use a landscaping company that has familiarity with maintaining stormwater BMPs. If you don't have that, you have to somehow demonstrate that you have some internal capacity that you'll be able to maintain the stormwater retention. And then DOEE itself does kind of like the NFL, random testing, random checking, every once in a while inspections to make sure that your BMPs are up to snuff. But at the same time, the way it works is every 3 years, you come back for a recertification process to keep selling your credits. And so that 3 years is that trigger for them to inspect and to make sure that everything's going okay. And so this is the new thing where in the past they would send somebody physically there to inspect and look and take pictures and all that. And now they're saying to save on human power hours from the agency, that if you can send your updated contract and also pictures showing the timestamp that you've taken pictures in the past month or two of when you're recertifying, that the plants are still in good order, that the BMPs are still working and all these different things, then you will get recertified. So the maintenance really falls on the supplier, the one that's building and selling the credits, to make sure that the stormwater is in working order, the retention's in working order.
Thanks, Khalil. And I'll just jump in to say, in Chicago, the onus is on the site owner or the seller. And I think what has been learned in other markets that are proactively and progressively managing stormwater is that they have a pretty, that the utility or the agency responsible is providing a lot of kind of upfront design guidance, detailed guidance, specification guidance for the design and engineering. And they're also providing very clear, very easy to follow maintenance instructions for typical best management practices for typical stormwater management facilities, so that those who are responsible for maintenance know what they're getting into when they're building something, but also how to maintain something over the long term. So here's a question for, this is a question about who designs the infrastructure for your project. And actually, Matt, I'm going to toss this one to you.
So what the city has done is right now we have identified different projects in different locations just based on some studies that we have. I'm going to use the University of Illinois and Illinois State Geological Survey study as a good example. That project we identified that it was identified that green infrastructure helps, and it's mostly in the right of way, and that can actually alleviate the loading for the gray infrastructure. So that would probably have to be like a project where if it's going to be designed, it would have to incorporate those recommendations and then be designed utilizing and factoring in the gray infrastructure. So it would probably have to be the city would probably have to lead that component of it, just so that way it hits. I don't think you'd want to have a developer go through and be putting in different green infrastructure components all up and down the street. We'd want to have it probably more uniform, more aesthetic look, so that way it kind of gives the residential neighborhood maybe some continuity and like sense of like harmony, I guess you could say. So I would say that one would probably be designed by the community. There might be some other ones, I guess, depending on how it works, where maybe it makes sense to have the developer or maybe the landowner have it. But I think that you have to factor in the landowner component of it whenever you're doing something, and they definitely need to have a say.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And I'll just add, I think we're really excited about this participatory public project process where it can occur on these types of projects to support the engineers and the landscape architects and the planners and the utility and the regulators who are structuring these projects. There's a few questions around types of landowners who may participate, and I think maybe I'll direct this to Jen and Khalil. Maybe if you could jump in as well. How might community land trusts enter into the market, or residents, or if you're a community actor? And say, for example, you're an affordable housing provider. How could these different types of participants participate, Jen?
Yeah, I think ideally those type of participants could be either demand or supply type participants. We've seen a lot of them as suppliers of projects by building green infrastructure on their site and then selling any extra capacity into the marketplace. And TNC has actually worked with a lot of these type of landowners, municipalities, land trusts, and nonprofits. So, if there is a project that you have in mind and you're looking for a way to secure some capital upfront, reach out to me and we can brainstorm on ways to maybe help you guys figure out the way to finance these type of projects. Khalil, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think that I was spot on that in DC, those are the type of sites that become supply sites to do these type of projects because they have big parking lots, big impervious surface areas. And so what DOEE has done in the city is on their database, they've created a section where interested landowners can list their contact information, their name, their address, all that stuff. So supply generators like District Stormwater can contact them, reach out and say, we have the financing, we're interested to do it, let's partner with you, and go from there.
Yeah, we aren't there yet in our market development, and that might be something down the line as we get more aggregators onto our platform that we can set up a system like that for people to reach out to kind of capitalize on the economies of scale of some of the green infrastructure projects that are out there.
Great, thank you. And I want to get this question in here. Khalil, this is also for you, I believe, or you're best suited to answer this right now. You talked a little bit about the kind of pre-development or transaction costs and the lessons learned in DC. Could you just kind of reiterate some of that lessons learned quickly?
Yeah, so there's so many of them. And one of the things I'll say is this is iterative. So I'm sure you guys will be learning and making adjustments along the way. But, we had all these thoughts about, oh, this is the algorithm, this is how it's going to work. And our first project was with a cemetery, which is owned by the Catholic Archdiocese, which is great because they're a sophisticated landowner that we can sign all these legal agreements with, and they're a large landowner. So we can continue to repeat this type of partnership with them to scale, where we can go next to Catholic University and all these other large landowners. So that seemed great. But the actual approval, the signing of this small stormwater projects on the cemetery had to go all the way up to the Cardinal of DC. And this is not high up on the Cardinal's priority list. And so it took several months of getting different people to understand the legal team, all this stuff. And so just that, during all that time, you're paying staff time to do that, and you're not able to employ any of the capital to actually start your design and your construction. And you're doing all that without knowing what's the infiltration rate in the soils, what's underneath those soils once we excavate. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be all clay? And so you're taking some risks there. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to work out with the city on. How can we shorten some of those type of processes by getting those self-identified sections where people can say, we're interested and we want to do it, and sign us up on the website, and those type of things as well. And that's why the city is also providing some of that grant funding to help cover some of those costs up front for stormwater retention aggregators who maybe don't have that liquidity and flexibility to just pay staff time for 18 months before they can even start building a project to sell credits.
Thank you. And we have a great question here that we didn't fully answer, but it is, are you actually moving water from one site to another site when you are talking about trading? And the answer is really, in this example, this credit trading market, no. We are creating new management capacity in a region that is within the same watershed, but will most likely be at a site that is hydrologically disconnected from the demand site. Hey, Jen, do you mind fielding this question about how are we going to reach out to folks? How are we going to manage the marketing and education portion of this?
Well, through webinars like this, we anticipate doing a lot of outreach and engagement through virtual experiences like this. I know MWRD is also going to be releasing press releases to a lot of the municipalities to let them know that this is an option that they can start recommending to developers as they bring in projects for permits. So, you know, also we're asking other people to let people know that this is a new opportunity in Cook County. So if you are a developer, if you are an engineer, if you're an architect, if you're a community resident, just if you can just help us get the word out that this new marketplace is available, that would be very appreciated. So yeah, those are a lot of the ways, and I know Ryan, you have also some ideas on outreaching to different types of participants.
Yeah, and I would say we're trying to get very creative about our both participation, education, and outreach. If you have ideas, especially in this time of quarantine and COVID, please reach out to us. We would love to work with you, with your community organizations, with your, if you are an engineering firm or municipality. We are here to be your partners in this process. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We just have a couple more minutes. I just want to make sure that we're getting to kind of the big questions, and we will be answering all these questions that are answered, if not by the end of our term, right afterwards. So there's a question about incentives for projects in opportunity zones and affordable housing projects. From Wayne, I think the short answer for this is StormStore and credit trading is likely to be a part of a economic development package or part of a pro forma for a project. We hope that it can be the incentive that gets a developer over the hump of actually making a development and looking at ways to provide bridge financing or pre-development funds, as Khalil was talking about, are part of the things that we're trying to accomplish. You know, this is, you know, a lot of these projects are complicated, especially there's a couple questions about affordable housing projects. If you work on affordable housing, you already know that the financial packages that are pieced together to make those projects viable are very complex. We hope that this will be an additional incentive to get those projects over the hump in communities where investment is needed. This last question I'm going to pitch to Jen. If you didn't learn from DC's model, which we did, where else did you get learnings from?
Yeah, so we looked at all different types of marketplaces. So we looked at wetland mitigation banking, we looked at nutrient credit trading markets, but we also looked at other stormwater markets, like in Chattanooga, the Grand Rapids market that is currently being studied. And I mean, DC is a sort of a staple for what they've done there. But even though it's a very different policy and regulatory setting, there are a lot of similar components that we need to build out for market administration, and also just generating projects to bring into the marketplace. So, you know, DC is different, but there are still a lot of really good lessons to be learned from that market and the success that they've found there.
Great. Thank you, Jen. And for all you, for all these other questions we did not get to, we will be getting to these questions. We appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for your attention, for your patience in listening to us, for your questions. We hope to be working with you in the near future to realize StormStore and to increase the opportunities for stormwater credit trading to make a difference in our region, in Cook County and beyond. A special thank you to my fellow speakers, to Jen, to Khalil, to Joe, to Matt. This is important work. You're great partners, and we look forward to doing more of these events in the future, to expanding our outreach. There's been a lot of generous suggestions in the Q&A and chat that there are people on this call who want to help us get the word out. We want to work with you. If you did make a comment, we'll reach out. If you haven't yet made a comment, the people to reach out to after this call are myself, rwilson@metroplanning.org, or Jen Jenkins, whose email is also available, and I can't remember offhand. Jen?
It's jennifer.jenkins@tnc.org.
Great.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah. And so I just want to recap some of the really important lessons that Khalil shared, but also that have been identified in our research and in our conversations with our local partners, the utilities, the engineers who are doing this really important development work in our region. It is built on identifying the relationships. So this front end work of educating and building relationships is critical. There are relationships with you here on this call and those elsewhere who are not in this room. Building confidence of the market through better policy and incentives, price floors or price guarantees, and price ceilings really help to build confidence in the market. Clear permitting, clear processes and guidance so that developers and engineers and consultants know what they're getting into and can see clearly the value. This is especially important in establishing and getting this program off to a good start. Because at the end of the day, we want to create impact for you, for your communities, to make your businesses run more smoothly and to achieve the sort of economic developments and impacts that cities like Calumet City are trying to achieve. So thank you all for joining us. This webinar was recorded. It will be shared by email for all those who have registered in a week or two following the event. So thank you for your time, and we will be shutting down the broadcast now.